Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Skift's editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit, joined as always by our trusted head of research, Seth Borko. Hey, Seth.
Hey, Sarah.
So today on the pod, we've got Kevin Tsang of Amex Ventures, who basically decides what your next favorite travel perk is going to be. So today we're going to talk luxury, loyalty, AI, because somebody has to keep track of all of those points and keep the spreadsheets balanced. But before we do, my weekly plea, send any questions or comments that you have to podcasts@skift.com. And if you like the pod, please rate us 5 stars and leave us a positive review. Tell your friends so we can spread the word about our beloved Skift Travel Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, Kevin. How are you doing?
Oh, doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's our pleasure. Hey, so Kevin, we don't get too many venture capitalists around these parts. We're excited to have you. You're running up Amex Ventures, and you have a couple of travel investments and a view on the travel sector. So tell us, what does, from your view as an investor within American Express, what's your view on the travel sector in 2025?
Sure. No, happy to tell you about that. I would, if it's okay, maybe I'll kick off with a bit of an intro on myself and the team, just to set context for the areas that I'll be commenting on. But for a little bit about me, I joined American Express in 2011, spent most of my time on the Amex Ventures team, and now lead our consumer services investments coverage. And so for us, that has a big focus on the membership categories that you might associate with our brand. So think travel, dining, entertainment, but we also, keep a pretty close eye to any kind of innovation, technology, or category that we think could be relevant for a consumer business. And as you mentioned, we made some investments in travel to help bring that to life. Last year, we invested in Mindtrip, which is an AI-powered travel planning platform. And then I'll keep the Amex Ventures piece quick so we can get into the travel discussion. But, our team is the strategic investment arm of American Express. You can think of us as a corporate venture capital arm, as if for those who are familiar with that term. So we have this dual mandate that's both financial and strategic, which means we're out there trying to make great venture investments that also can help accelerate innovation for our business. And we do that through partnership.
Well, actually, can I ask you a question on that before we go too much deeper into it? Because I don't know that all of our audience will be familiar with what corporate venture capital is as opposed to regular venture capital. So how is being a VC within American Express different than being a VC at a standalone VC firm? And how does the Amex card, which is how most of our listeners will be familiar with you, how does the Amex card influence your investment criteria?
Sure. Yeah, that's core to the strategic mandate of our investment model. And maybe to kind of break it out a little bit for a second, when you think of traditional venture investments, they are investing in startups just like we are, but with this one singular focus of financial return at the end of the day. For us, and you can also think of them as having investment strategies, which might cut across certain funds or industries. So you could think of a VC firm that might have a AI focus or a travel focus, right? For us on the corporate venture capital side, we are supporting areas that are relevant for American Express. We use this model of investment to help accelerate innovation for our business. And so we are looking for startups that we think could become potential partners for us in new and emerging areas. And so that's part of the aperture that we are looking through. And we've been around since 2011 and made a little over 100 investments since inception.
And I have to imagine that travel is relevant as a criteria for you for an Amex strategic investment. So I guess back to the original question, back to the top, what do you see as your view from the investor point of view for the travel sector in 2025? Are you optimistic? Are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you cautious? What's going on?
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. So we're excited about the travel sector right now. I will say this is in part due to all the innovation around AI and how it's probably impacting a lot of industries right now. But I would say that, travel use cases are very much a part of the discussion, as I'm sure you both noticed. And when I kind of try to translate my excitement in the sector, for a long time, I'm a believer that technology is a very powerful enabler of travel. The example that I like to reference is mobile and GPS and how much we use it during all of our travels. I'll date myself with a brief story, which is just, I still remember our road trips with my family, my mother sitting in the passenger seat, trying to read a paper map with a flashlight in the dark and us missing our stop, and how now it's much more seamless. And so I'm really excited about the new ways that like a big technology change will be able to impact the travel journey for all of us.
I did that myself.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
last week, right, Sarah? Last
Yeah,
week you were doing
exactly.
that.
Exactly right.
Well, I was going to ask just, and I'm going to turn over to you in a second, Sarah. But what are the travel companies in your portfolio today?
Sure. So we have a handful of companies in our portfolio. I would say MindTrip is one of the more recent ones that we've been really excited about and probably captures some of the more recent trends. In the past, we've also made investments in Turo, as well as there's a company called Freebird that has since exited our portfolio, but we have a handful of different travel investments in the space.
So I'm curious how you think about travel as a part of a larger sector or when it stands on its own. Like in your work, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I would say because our team covers a lot of different areas, including fintech, commerce, enterprise software, it's definitely a topic or a question that comes up in our life because these things can cut across different industries. For me, when I think travel tech stands on its own, is that when it's really solving for some of the unique complexities that come across with a travel journey. And I kind of was going to bring up e-commerce as kind of an example of this. When you go buy a flight online, it actually does feel a little bit quite a bit different from purchasing any kind of physical product, just because of the nature of the different, whether it's routes, times, or the considerations that go with kind of planning a trip versus just buying, say a book on a website. But then when you actually get to the checkout portion, the payment piece, while there are some travel nuances, is actually pretty similar, right? You're paying with your card, there's a pay button. And so when I think about where it's unique to travel, it's like solving for these big pain points or nuances that are part of the sector that maybe are less portable to other industries.
And what about in the restaurant side of things? I know you have a couple of food related investments too. Like, do you see a lot of correlation there between travelers and food and some of those things?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we plan our trips, food often is a big part of, what we're thinking about. It's definitely becoming a bigger topic now, I would say, because there's a little bit more opportunity to connect the travel journey across these different things that we're doing, whether it's an experience, whether it's a restaurant, it's a site to see. And so it's starting to bleed in more. But I would say maybe historically, people would think of them as kind of more distinct than they were just by the nature of the consumer journey.
And so you're leading a lot of the consumer focused investments. Are there any consumer, like, how do you work from like a thesis perspective? Does Amex Ventures, do you have some big picture thesis and you're trying to fill in holes in these buckets, or are you working from the bottoms up? You're just trying to find interesting companies. And are there any interesting consumer themes that you really, really want to invest in these days?
It's interesting because we are a corporate venture capital model. We have this iterative approach, which involves both external market thesis areas that we'll explore, as well as thinking about what the objectives of the company are. And it's really this kind of balance between the two. Our kind of areas I invest in doesn't necessarily start in one or either of the places, but the external market activity is a big part of it. If I was going to pull one consumer theme that's definitely jumping out of mind, it's probably going to be, as you might expect, related to AI. But there's just a lot of there's a potential platform shift, right, with the different amount of innovation that people are interacting with these new tools, and what that means for what consumers expect. So I think maybe to be more precise there, with the new AI models, we are interacting with technology with a much more natural language, conversational kind of point of view, as opposed to kind of clicking through a list of filters to figure out everything that you want to do. I don't think that will be limited to just those platforms, and it's really going to come across in all the ways that consumers interact with the platforms they engage with, and that limited friction that's like, or reduced friction that's coming from that will be a big part of the discussion and something we're tracking.
So we just had our Skift Data and AI Summit last week in New York City, and we had a really interesting pitch session where we had some AI startups pitching to some investors. And I'm curious, I asked the investors, and I'm curious to hear what you say. What makes an AI travel startup fundable in 2025? Like, how do you get that money if you're a potential founder? Because like it seems like we've kind of crossed a bit over the time where it's like anything with the word AI in it is going to get funded. Like we're a step over that now. So what's your thought on that?
No, yeah, the market and the has definitely evolved over the last few years. And so some of that initial excitement, while there's still a lot of excitement, there's kind of a different, slightly adjusted view, I would say. When I think about what we look for on our side on Amex Ventures for what would make an AI travel startup fundable, part of it's going to be coming from really creating a value proposition that extends well beyond the value that the LLMs are providing. And so, what do you build on top of that to make this a complete offering? And it should also be something that should be challenging for an incumbent to do by just partnering with an AI model itself, because those are threats, competitive threats in the market. The other big piece to say is that if you're all tracking what the big AI players are doing, they're continuing to accelerate and innovate themselves. And so you would have to make sure you can have a differentiation plan that assumes that those guys are all going to get better and continue to roll out new products and new technology. So I'm still a big believer in the startup opportunity here, but the founders are going to need to create a pretty compelling vision that answers a lot of those points that I just mentioned.
Do you have any examples of what a good, because that's such an that's such an easy thing to say and such a hard thing to do. Just don't be disrupted by OpenAI. Like, what is that? What is that in practice when you see a great company? What does that mean that you're somehow not going to be disrupted by Google or OpenAI, when they're throwing quite literally billions, if not tens of billions, at this problem?
Yeah, they certainly have a lot of resources, and we've seen some of the big announcements. And so I don't know if there's one single purpose to this answer, but I would probably anchor it in thinking about, where are they best suited to play a role? What are some of their priorities, and what is maybe a priority that would hit their list, or what, is something that they would build that's just not necessarily part of their tool. They're building very big platforms. And so I don't want to speak to any of them in particular, but I think there is value to specialization and focus. And so when you kind of hone that in and solve for a big problem that makes sense in the context of the factors I mentioned, those are things that we are looking for.
Yeah, one of the conversations that I sort of heard at our Data and AI Summit was about kind of what you were just saying, specialty, like horizontal AI versus vertical AI. And there's a lot of companies trying to build vertical AI in travel. I'm curious what you think the potential, what is like the blue sky like potential for vertical AI look like in travel, in your opinion, Kevin?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that debate between the two is definitely a hot one. I can share my perspectives
what do you think about
on it.
Yeah, share. Let's share your perspective. The broad one in terms of vertical AI versus horizontal AI, and then let's talk about travel specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say on the broad one, we've seen this before to a certain extent when you think of vertical software, right? And all the SaaS solutions that have come before, even pre-AI. And so this concept of a vertical offering has made sense for a while. And there's just industries that have nuances, that have different workflows that they need support, and a focused solution has value to it. When we think about the venture perspective of there, it certainly needs to be a big enough opportunity and vertical category that can support, the venture-backed returns that are needed. The other piece that maybe is net new is that, software is a little bit, could theoretically be a little bit more efficient to create in a world of AI. And so the potential to build a software more efficiently and be able to target the market and leverage the new capabilities, that creates a little bit more of an open aperture for how, that could evolve in this new kind of vertical AI perspective.
So it's kind of like AI is a horizontal technology, but it's a horizontal technology that lets you build vertical software faster. Is sort of what you're saying.
You're kind of going back and forth between the two, but yeah, that's it's kind of a fun time right now.
And within travel, what do you make of travel? What are some travel AI use cases that you're excited about?
Sure. Yeah. I would break this up a little bit between consumer and kind of the more B2B element of travel. And I would admit, I focus a little bit more on the consumer side just through my nature of my role on Amex Ventures. And so, I am a believer that travel is a big category. And so a vertical offering for consumers there feels like a category that would make sense for there to be. And then when you kind of move to the B2B side, that will touch a little bit more of the industry players and what are the big problems that could be solved. And you could try to probably go high enough level that you're creating software that could be creating a lot of efficiency for big chunks of that market. But I don't want to name any in particular.
So I have two questions. First is on, this buzzword that I guess we heard a lot last week, but you hear it everywhere now, is kind of agentic AI or agentify the booking process. But I mean, for me, I've tried to use, just as a consumer, I travel a lot. I've tried to use AI to help me travel. It sucks. It's not good. It can't do it. It can't do it yet. It's really, really, really terrible right now. I'm curious first, how long you think it's going to take where it actually, it's like when I worked at Bloomberg, we used AI quite a bit, and it was great. This was like 10 years ago, so really at the beginning of when AI kind of started to be actually used for real. But then when ChatGPT came out, I'm like, oh my God, they got it. Like they did it. And so like, when is that moment coming for consumer travel where it's finally like, nice try, I see what you're doing here, to like, oh, okay, like this is actually going to work. Like I'm actually going to have an agentic, like, a person, a bot acting as me, doing as good of a job or better than I could have done myself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing your experience and trying it out as well. I would say is exciting, emerging area, and some of the perspectives here is that we also think it's early in the journey, and that probably resonates a little bit with what you're sharing. The time period is hard to put a pin on, so it might feel like I'm dodging it a little bit. But what I would anchor to maybe is like there's a saying in technology, I'm sure you've heard it before, where we often overestimate the change in the near term, but then underestimate it in the long term. There's like some of that feel here where we see that some of these pieces are working, but also not working without challenges as well, because the internet was made for humans, right, and not necessarily the agents yet. But it will be interesting to see what problems that we can solve in the next period to kind of help bring us along.
And I will say that it's kind of like, it's not all terrible. I mean, it's like, it's one of those things where, we just get so spoiled, like so easily when all of it happens, like, when all of a sudden AI can write my emails. It's like, well, why can't it book my like multi-stage vacation? And it's like, okay, hold your horses here, Sarah.
Yeah.
But I
guess the
curious.
One other piece too, I just add there is like, if you kind of think of that journey you mentioned, like when you first saw some of these kind of come about and how much they have evolved in this relatively short time span. And like, we're having this conversation when it used to be just, words in a chat interface. And so to your points, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves.
Yeah, and Sarah, what's the cost for sending a bad email versus the cost for planning a bad trip? Very different, right?
That depends upon the email, Seth. That depends upon the email. I mean,
you're right. I should have downplayed the stakes of the written word.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious to get your thoughts about like when we go to air, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about aviation. One of the big things that's happened recently is this kind of pivot towards clear and all of the, like, there was this real pain point for travelers, like standing in long lines, and the business traveler who just wants to, like, I will pay you more money if I can just, get through, save a little bit of time, get through faster. I'm curious where like that customer pain, especially in aviation, still equates to opportunity in your perspective, like disruption management, rebooking, flight delay insurance, all that type of stuff. How does Amex Ventures evaluate those type of like aviation adjacent bets?
Yeah. So I would say at American Express, we touch our consumer card members across the travel journey. If you kind of look at our products and perks, and so you had mentioned, some of the benefits we have there, you can think of our lounges as part of that experience and touching the pieces that you're describing.
And I do.
So those ideas and concepts are certainly relevant to us, and we think about them and we try to find solutions to them. When we go to the venture piece there, that's where finding scalable opportunities is the thing that we're most interested in, just because some of those do tend to be, more narrow. And so, we are definitely excited about the space. And if anyone has any great ideas on improving that journey, it's definitely relevant to us. But we will also be looking at it through this lens of, how does this become a scalable opportunity? And there's certainly some examples of it. It's just that's part of the evaluation that we would apply.
All right, Kevin, we want a little bit of equity. If any deals come to you from this podcast, we want a little, just a couple of shares. That's all we want.
Yeah,
that's all we ask.
Yeah.
Well, if you are interested, you should reach out to Kevin if you're a startup founder. We, meanwhile, are going to take a quick break while we process this, and we will be back with more conversation with Kevin about startup investing in travel and beyond in 2025 after a quick message from our sponsors.
Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast, where we are talking with Amex Ventures about all things AI, investing, travel, and all that good stuff. So, Kevin, I'm curious to get some behind the scenes insight from you. Like, what can you tell us about what's, we were just talking about scaling and about how, your what you're interested in aviation, maybe aviation adjacent businesses, is how they can actually scale. So I'm curious about, maybe what you could tell us about your portfolio or your deal flow and what's scaling really behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, founders we meet are excited about the tools that they're able to use. I would say they're able to do a lot more with less now. And there's probably maybe two buckets of things that I would kind of highlight. They're not necessarily specific, but you can imagine manual tasks that can be done much more efficiently. And so if you had an idea before that was difficult to scale because there was this semi-manual component, this kind of opens up the aperture and some of the opportunity we're excited about. And then on the development side, the rapid prototyping, the ability to create an idea quickly and at the pace of a startup, there's definitely a lot of excitement around the tools that are helping them do that.
And then I wanted to ask you about some of your investments. Mindtrip you've mentioned a couple times as an AI-powered startup. So what's the story? What's the story there, and what gets you excited about that investment?
Yeah. So for Mindtrip, we met them a few years ago or a couple years ago, really at the beginning of all this wave, I would say. And we had this idea that this new technology was going to be relevant for travel. They approached it with a white page, a blank slate, and said, if you were going to build a travel planning platform today and you knew you had these tools, what would you do? And I think for us, that was a really compelling vision. The team was tenured and experienced from prior startups, and they really brought the gang back together to do another one. And so we spent a lot of time with the team. What I've been excited about is the product velocity since they've launched. It's changed a lot since our early discussions there. They're continuing to find new ways to experiment with AI and the tools that might be needed for it. And some of them that we didn't expect when we first invested in them or when we first met with them. So if you've seen some of their features around Start Anywhere, where they're, taking your travel inspo and just injecting it into their platform, or the group chat feature that they have, which allows travelers to kind of talk together in a single chat interface, but then also leverage the AI. There's a lot to be excited about a team that's very focused on this problem and has the backing and history from prior experiences.
I don't want to press you too deeply. I see that they have some creator stuff going on. Social commerce was one of our big mega trends this year. Are they doing a lot with, how is AI and social commerce coming together generally, not just at Mindtrip, but is that something that you see as interesting?
Yeah, I would. So I can't speak too specifically on their business pieces, but what I can say, I mentioned the Start Anywhere feature. There is a recognition that travel inspiration and creators is kind of intersecting, or a big part of the how younger consumers are interacting with travel planning, and so that was a piece of it. I would also kind of maybe reference back to some of the comments I made earlier about how do you insert more value, right, besides just what's coming from the LLMs. They are finding unique ways by interacting with different people in the ecosystem, and that's going to add value to the platform.
I also I had to ask you, I see I think you have this under consumer, so I think this is your purview, but stop me if I'm wrong. But you have this Boom Supersonic investment here. I'm fascinated by this company. I follow the CEO on Twitter. I like him, and the U.S. government just cleared supersonic flights over the United States, so it kind of puts them back in the spotlight. Is there any? Do you have any? What's like? Are you excited? Is that one you're excited about, or talk us about that one a little bit? Supersonic travel.
For Boom Supersonic, we made that investment a number of years ago. I would say, there's, as you mentioned, they're in the news, which is certainly encouraging. Travel is a big part of our business, and so you can kind of see why we were drawn to the future of travel that they were kind of exhibiting, and you're wishing them all the success and the best. It is a big problem, and I think we can all agree that it'll be amazing if we could all, fly places faster.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting concept to me, and it's just. I mean, I know that it's not quite like true consumer software like what we've been talking about, but as a product, it's just a cool product to be building from a startup perspective. Are there any other travel companies in your portfolio that you're particularly excited about, Kevin?
So, our team does a lot of activity across travel. And so, we have another investment company called Self-Book that you probably have seen in the news. And I think they are doing some exciting things when it comes to commerce and travel and trying to find ways to make this more seamless for all of us.
Why don't you think we see more dedicated travel venture capitalists? This is a slightly different one, but it's something that I've thought about a lot. And you're in the sector. You're in the business, and I feel like there's very few VC firms that just do travel as a sector, and Amex doesn't either. You're a corporate venture. You're across the spectrum. You're across consumer and many other categories. Why don't you think travel gets those dedicated funds? I mean, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I obviously enjoy the travel space. It's actually a big part of what makes my job fun, and so I probably can ask some similar questions when I take a step back and I kind of look at the venture landscape overall. There are a lot of the funds have become bigger. They can also invest in travel even if they're not purely investing in travel, and then your ability to follow the opportunity to get the best returns. Right, and really align the incentives with the LP is going to be part of that strategy. And so I guess for me, it's you kind of have to look at the opportunities of these people are going to be wanting to find opportunities with the best ROI and having some ability and flexibility to invest across sectors will give you a little bit more of that optionality. And when they see a great travel startup, and it's exciting and encouraging to see some of the growth rounds that we've seen this year, I think that's a good statement for the sector. It does seem that there's opportunity for travel-specific funds in the earlier stage because there is this unique expertise that comes with knowing this space well. And I think that's where I've seen a little bit more of those travel-focused venture firms.
It's all about the optionality. I see it now.
How are you thinking about U.S. travel-based startups versus more global ones? Is there any big difference there?
So at Amex Ventures, we do have a global mandate. And so we do invest both in the US and internationally. But I guess when you kind of look at the market dollars and where VC capital is deployed, there is a heavy weighted to the US. And so it draws there. And that does feed into both any startup, but also travel specific startups. But we are excited about innovation that's happening globally. I would say when we think about the opportunity for international startups, it's really about new novel innovation that could also be exported or both themselves or in concept to other markets. I think different regions have innovated differently, and you've seen some of those topics. I mean, I think you've probably heard the super app word thrown around in the industry about and how that has evolved. And so we look for things that are probably similar to that when we look for international opportunities.
Are you a believer that we can build a U.S. super app? I mean, in China, super apps exist. In Southeast Asia, super apps exist. Will one exist in the U.S.? Not just travel, in general.
So being mindful
why hasn't it happened?
Yeah.
Why
that
don't
might
we
be
have
the easier
Weibo
one
here?
for me to answer on a pod. I would just say the markets have evolved differently. And so the internet and the way it was set up and the way that they're all integrated has evolved in a different way. And so that's why some of those hasn't come in the same like you don't see a one for one, but you definitely hear people in the market, right, thinking about it, and you see some of the activity in the space where people are expanding and partnering with different companies. So I think we'll have to see how it plays out, but I don't want to speculate unnecessarily on on this one.
Oh, we love a little speculation, Kevin. Sorry.
I know we especially unnecessary speculation. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the best kind of speculation.
We understand American Express has a legal department that doesn't want you to speculate, but we love it. I mean, are there any emerging categories? Speak along the lines of travel, along the lines of super app. Are there any emerging consumer categories that are exciting to you? I'm thinking here maybe sustainability, maybe wellness, maybe leisure, blended business leisure travel. What stands out to you?
I might answer this in a slightly different way, but I think hopefully you'll appreciate for me, what I take away from those is that, the reasons why people are traveling is expanding and more than ever. And for me, there's actually something really interesting about understanding the why behind someone's trip. We often talk about recommendations to people, but if you don't know why someone is going on a trip, it actually, is a big limiting factor in how you do that. And so you might know someone's travel profile and how they like things, but if you're going to recommend someone on a business trip versus their honeymoon versus a wellness, like, it's actually a really interesting and compelling data point. And the fact that there's more of these coming, right, just adds to that. So as you mentioned, the few different versions of that's the piece that I'm kind of interested in right now.
Will AI help us better understand the why, you think?
They will likely play a role, but there's also a piece of the consumer sharing some piece of their data. It could be like very explicitly, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And so we've seen some interesting creative ways to learn more about, why someone might be going on a specific trip and like what it means when you then go to try and recommend things for them.
I sometimes hear the word zero party data. Is that one that you're excited about? Is that
Yeah,
a concept you like?
That's a concept that comes up. And I just think part of it is the other piece of this is just for all these AIs to be more proactive and not less reactive. And so we are kind of in this journey, right, where we always have to prompt things, but the future where maybe not all of it has to be explicitly prompt is one.
I like that. I like that. You instead of you prompting the AI prompts you. I like that thought, Kevin. That's interesting.
So, what's the role of the big boys in this, like the Marriotts, the Bookings, the Googles, even as partners? I don't know, acquirers, competitors to these startups. How do they factor into this equation?
Yeah, I would say they're definitely gonna play a role. You mentioned a few different categories, and they all have like slightly different parts, and so it's gonna look a little bit different for each. I would say that for me, there's a lot of things in the travel sector that work and don't need to be recreated, and so I wouldn't want a startup to go out and do that. And so that's where partnerships or different types of collaboration will become. And so the startups are going to be able to focus on the net new things with extreme focus that hopefully will be complementary to some of these big players. And finding that intersection will be the opportunity. And so, that's very core to what we do, as a corporate venture capital firm, and trying to find those types of opportunities where, the 1+1, equals more.
And what does, as you look for 1+1 = 3, what do you think success looks like for a startup or for an investment? I think it used to be the paradigm that success was scale. It was product market fit. It was users. It was growth. Now maybe this paradigm is a little more focused towards profitability, or maybe that was just a sort of recession fear kind of thing. Like what is a success today? Profitability, scale, revenue, users.
Yeah. So for success, it's going to look a little bit different depending on your stage, because all the companies are in like different parts of the journey. Maybe focusing more on the early stage, because that's where I spend a lot of my time for new investments. There's not going to be one right answer for all of these, especially with what they're building. But for the big ideas, I would say, the first one will probably end up being product market fit for an early stage company. One thing to consider on the profitability side is that the technology is getting better, right? It's becoming more affordable for more parties. And so if you looked at it just today, right, that might not be the right view. But if you get all that traction and then the technology improves and you can do even more, that will kind of put someone on a journey that could be exciting.
So what are you most excited about? What's the thing that you like, if we were back here in a year, you'd be most excited to tell us was a success?
Yeah, I would say I'm most excited about just really seeing new. The market is moving so quickly, and there's a lot of things happening, and so having startups that are really picking up on these emerging themes, whether it be how AI search is evolving, or how personalization and memory kind of are going to be coming into effect, and really having a experience that is very much more seamless. I'm excited about travel personally, and just excited for all the new technology right, that it will bring, and being able to find startups in that space that can really uplift the travel experience is what I'm excited about.
How do you think AI search is evolving, Kevin? Can I ask you that? I thought I asked you that, but I must have forgotten to. I mean, what do you think that future looks like?
Yeah, it's definitely in the news right now, and I'm trying to be mindful of everything that's happening. But what I could probably say is that we probably all, at least on the personal side, for who are early adopters of this technology, are using these platforms more, and you might be seeing shifts in how your behavior is, of where you find your recommendations and where you go to search, and the way that those answers are provided to you. And so there is a big change right now, and there's going to be technology that's tied to all of that.
And the opportunity for Amex Ventures to make a lot of money investing in it, right?
Well, we have a dual mandate.
You do it, yeah. Let me ask you a final question. Kevin, you're meeting with a startup founder. They've got a great pitch. You're out to drinks. They take out a credit card, and it's not an American Express. What happens? Do they still get the check, Kevin, or no?
I will ask them a little bit more to understand why they would be using a different product, but we'll kind of take it from there.
All right.
Straight to jail. Straight to jail. Yeah.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. We really enjoyed this conversation and hearing your point of view on where the future of travel is going, and the future of travel startups and startups in the world in general. So exciting moment and exciting time. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.